Ryan Mitchell stood silently in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back. Gone was the polished CEO of Mitchell & Cumber luxury brands, the man who wore tailored suits, drove a sleek black Tesla, and whose face graced magazine covers under headlines like "America's Boldest Innovator." In his place stood someone unshaven, unkempt, and inconspicuous. His neatly trimmed beard had been replaced with days of stubble. His signature hair, usually parted and gelled with precision, now hung limp under a worn baseball cap. Thick, cheap glasses sat on his nose, not for vision, but for disguise. The man in the mirror looked 10 years older and a world away from the boardroom. And that was the point. This wasn't Ryan Mitchell anymore. This was Josh Turner, warehouse temp with a spotty resume and nothing to lose. The transformation hadn't been for show, it had been a necessity. 3 months ago, Ryan started receiving anonymous emails from someone claiming to work at his Houston distribution center. The messages were short but sharp. Employees being harassed, safety violations everywhere, someone skimming health benefits. You built something good. They're destroying it. At first, he dismissed them as exaggerated complaints. Every big company had a few disgruntled voices. But then came photos, documents, and a chilling video clip of a pregnant worker being verbally abused by a supervisor. The board wanted to send internal auditors. PR advised hiring third-party investigators. Ryan had seen what those methods produced. Reports tailored to protect reputations, not uncover truth. If something was really rotting from the inside, he'd have to see it with his own eyes. So he planned his descent from the top. He created a fake identity, Josh Turner, complete with a patched-together work history, forged references, and a rental address in a working-class neighborhood. He traded in his suits for thrift store jeans and a faded T-shirt that smelled faintly of someone else's laundry detergent. He bought a battered 2010 Ford Focus off Craigslist and paid cash to avoid paperwork. His driver's license photo was deliberately grainy. The disguise had to be perfect, not for a publicity stunt, but to ensure he'd be seen as just another disposable worker. And on that humid Monday morning, as he pulled into the employee parking lot of the Houston warehouse, heart pounding in his chest, Ryan Mitchell took his first real step into the world he thought he understood. The building looked the same as he remembered it from his last executive visit. Grey concrete, towering steel doors, and the large Mitchell & Co. logo painted boldly across the side. But today, for the first time, he didn't approach it through the polished lobby with a smiling manager waiting to greet him. Instead, he followed a line of tired workers dragging themselves through the employee entrance, clutching cheap coffee cups and ignoring the burn of the sun. His heart twisted. He'd built this company to stand for something more than just profits, more than just prestige. But this morning, he wasn't walking into his company. He was walking into theirs. And judging by the slumped shoulders and dead stares around him, something had gone terribly wrong. A sharp voice cut through the hallway. "Josh Turner, you the new guy?" It was a woman with a clipboard and a laminated badge clipped to her lanyard. Her name tag read Linda Martinez, HR coordinator. Her eyes were hard, her tone flat. "Orientation starts in 5. Don't be late. Marcus hates that." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked. Ryan followed, nerves tightening with every step. He scanned the walls. No safety signage, no posted labor rights notices. The break room he passed was dimly lit and smelled of burnt coffee. The first red flag had been raised, and he hadn't even punched in yet. Inside, 20 new hires sat on cheap plastic chairs in a cramped room that hadn't seen fresh paint in years. A dusty whiteboard hung crooked on the wall beside a corkboard filled with outdated flyers. A man in a wrinkled polo entered 10 minutes late and threw a stack of folders on a table. "Welcome to your first day of hell," he announced. "I'm Marcus. I'm not your friend. I don't care about your problems. You fall behind, you're gone." Nervous chuckles filled the room. Ryan didn't laugh. This wasn't a rough-around-the-edges pep talk. This was a warning. And as Marcus launched into a tirade about quotas, hours, and keeping your head down, Ryan realized something he hadn't allowed himself to fully believe until now. His company wasn't just mismanaged at the bottom, it had become a machine that ground down people, and he was about to see just how deep the gears went. Ryan Mitchell had walked through hundreds of doors bearing the Mitchell and Cumber logo, but none felt like this. As Josh Turner, he passed under the same steel-framed threshold as dozens of workers arriving for the day. No applause, no smiling manager, no catered coffee waiting in the break room. The warehouse loomed over him, functional and cold, humming with the buzz of forklifts and strained ventilation. Inside, the concrete floors were scuffed and sticky in places, illuminated by flickering lights that hadn't been replaced in months. He kept his head low, his disguise intact, but his eyes were wide open. He wasn't here for greetings or platitudes. He was here to watch, and what he saw in his first hour unsettled him more than he'd expected. The first red flag came before he even punched in. A worker darted across the path of a moving forklift, no safety vest in sight. There were no clear pedestrian lanes, no warning signs, no safety barriers near towering stacks of boxed inventory. Ryan paused, glancing up at a frayed safety banner half hanging from the wall. 0 injuries since. The rest was blank, torn off. He'd signed off on a $50,000 safety signage budget last year, and this was what it had bought. His chest tightened. As employees filed into the main floor, he noticed a stack of shrink-wrapped pallets dangerously leaning to one side, ignored as if it were part of the scenery. One wrong move, one unbalanced push, and someone would get crushed. But no one seemed alarmed. They were used to it. That, Ryan realized, was its own kind of danger. He followed the others to orientation, which turned out to be a cramped room with no windows and barely functioning air conditioning. Plastic chairs lined the walls, some cracked, others stained. The only items on the table were a dusty coffee pot and a crooked sign-in sheet. As the new hires sat waiting, glancing nervously at each other, Ryan studied them. Young, old, male, female, a cross-section of working-class America, all looking for a fair shot. No one offered a warm welcome. No one asked them about their goals or explained their rights. Instead, at exactly 8:11 a.m., the door swung open and a man barged in like a storm. "Morning sunshine," Marcus Hayes announced, though his tone carried none of the cheer the words suggested. Mid-40s, stocky build and wearing a Mitchell & Co. polo with a faded logo, Marcus dropped a stack of folders on the desk and leaned against the wall with crossed arms. "Welcome to your first day of hell." Some of the recruits laughed nervously, unsure whether it was a joke. Ryan didn't. He recognized the tactic: disarm them early, assert dominance, keep them uncertain. Marcus continued, "I'm not here to be your friend. I don't care about your problems. You show up, you work. If you don't, the line of people waiting to replace you stretches out the door." His delivery was effortless, like he'd said it 1,000 times. Maybe he had. Ryan raised a hand, staying in character, and asked about breaks and compensation. Marcus's response was instant and cutting. "If you're already asking about breaks," he said, "maybe this isn't the place for you. You want perks and beanbags? Go apply to Google." Laughter echoed louder this time. The message was clear. Questions meant weakness. Expectations were punishable, and caring about fairness made you a target. Ryan clenched his jaw, his fists pressed against his thighs. This was more than just a bad attitude. It was a culture built on intimidation. New hires weren't being prepared, they were being conditioned. By the end of the orientation, Ryan had a headache, not from information overload, but from the lack of it. There were no manuals handed out, no emergency procedures reviewed, no mention of OSHA standards, union rights, or even basic warehouse layouts. Just a vague schedule, a list of metrics, and an unspoken rule to keep your head down. He watched as the others filed out toward their assignments, still unsure what they were supposed to do or where they were supposed to go. A woman in her 50s muttered under her breath, "Feels more like prison than a job." Ryan didn't disagree, and as he stepped out onto the warehouse floor, an unfamiliar terrain of hazards, noise, and apathy, he realized something darkly ironic. He had once believed his company operated with military-grade precision. Now he could see it was built on fear, neglect, and silence. Ryan's first assignment came without warning or instruction. A supervisor barked his name, well, Josh Turner's, and waved vaguely toward the rear loading dock. "You're on unload today. Get moving." No training, no checklist, no explanation. Ryan followed the sound of shouting and beeping forklifts, dodging workers and pallets as he navigated the cavernous warehouse floor. The loading dock smelled like sweat and diesel. Crates were stacked high, tagged and scribbled with numbers he didn't yet understand. A mountain of boxes was already waiting, and no one seemed interested in helping. He approached one of the workers, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and permanent scowl etched into his features. "Hey," Ryan said carefully, "I think I'm assigned here. Can you show me—" The man cut him off with a laugh. "Look, everyone, Harvard's got questions." That was Rick Doyle, and from the sneer on his face, Ryan knew the nickname would stick. "Maybe we should get him a textbook," Rick added, eliciting a round of chuckles from the nearby crew. "You want a tour, Professor? There's the jack, there's the truck, and there's your quota. Try not to hurt yourself." Ryan nodded quietly, forcing a smile, and picked up the pallet jack. His hands were already raw from the morning, but he pushed through. He'd come here to learn the truth, and that meant enduring what his workers endured. Still, the physical toll surprised him. Boxes were heavier than expected. The warehouse's layout made no ergonomic sense. There was no clear traffic pattern, no signs, and every lift seemed to come with a gamble of collision. Every question he asked about inventory codes, safety limits, or standard procedure was met with rolled eyes or open ridicule. At lunch, Ryan slumped down onto a bench in the break room, sweat clinging to his back. The clock read 1:08 p.m. According to the employee handbook he himself had once approved, lunch breaks were supposed to be 45 minutes. But barely 22 minutes had passed when a voice barked from the hallway. "Back to the floor," someone yelled, "unless you want to lose the rest of your shift." Workers groaned and rose. Ryan followed suit, but the bitterness in the air was palpable. "That's every day now," one of them muttered under his breath. "They say it's peak volume season. Been peak volume since last year." Ryan wanted to ask more, but the look on his colleague's face said not to push it. Even casual conversation felt risky here, like the walls had ears and the wrong word could get you replaced. Throughout the week, Ryan noticed patterns that disturbed him deeply. Whenever someone pointed out an issue, damaged inventory, faulty equipment, anything, the supervisors brushed it aside. "File it later," they'd say, or worse, "Don't worry about it." But nothing ever got filed. Concerns disappeared into a void. One worker accidentally dropped a box of merchandise when a forklift nearly clipped her. No incident report was made. Instead, she was yelled at for causing delays. Another employee requested a break after cutting his hand on a rusted pallet. He was told to wrap it with tape and keep moving. The casual indifference to pain, both physical and emotional, was staggering. But it wasn't laziness. It was cultural. This was a workplace where showing weakness or even speaking up was considered an offense. Supervisors wielded authority like a weapon. They didn't lead. They ruled. Everything was delivered as an order, every question answered with condescension or silence. Ryan had built his company around the idea of shared purpose, of empowering teams. Here, that philosophy was a foreign language. He watched as employees clocked in like machines, avoiding eye contact, keeping their heads down, minimizing their existence just to make it to the end of the day. Rick Doyle, in particular, took pleasure in humiliating others. "Hey, Josh," he'd say loudly in front of others, "figure out how to work that jack yet, or you still need flashcards." The room would laugh, and Ryan would smile, tightly, silently, but every remark deepened the pit in his stomach. By the end of the week, Ryan felt more than just exhaustion. He felt disillusioned. He had always imagined that, if problems ever arose in his warehouses, they would be due to poor oversight or isolated bad actors. But this wasn't isolated. It was systemic. It was embedded in the very bones of the operation. What he witnessed wasn't just bad management, it was institutional rot, a culture that punished curiosity, crushed morale, and rewarded cruelty. And as Ryan sat in his car that Friday night, hands blistered, back aching, and heart heavy, he realized something terrifying. He had built the structure, but someone else had filled it with poison. If he didn't act soon, this place wouldn't just destroy the workers. It would destroy everything he had worked his entire life to build. It was Thursday afternoon, and the Houston heat pressed down on the warehouse like a heavy blanket. Ryan's shirt clung to his back with a mixture of sweat and dust as he finished unloading a shipment of poorly labeled boxes. His hands throbbed from splinters and calluses, his legs ached from days of repetitive strain, and the mental fatigue was even worse. Yet as Josh Turner, he still had one job left: take a short break, refill his water, and keep his head down. That last part was becoming increasingly difficult. The more he saw, the more the warehouse resembled a ticking time bomb. And on that particular afternoon, the explosion began to take shape when he found himself in the far corner of the break room at the wrong, or perhaps right, time. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He was simply refilling his bottle from the sink in the utility area when two supervisors entered through the back hallway, not noticing him in the shadows. One was David Brooks, the same man who'd leaned over his table on day one to offer a not-so-subtle threat. The other wore a grey polo and a crooked name tag: Mason. They were speaking in low tones, but Ryan caught enough to stop breathing. "The off-the-books load goes out tonight," Mason said. "Double shrink-wrap the pallets like last time. Customs doesn't check our stuff." David replied, "You've got to talk to Wheeler. He was late logging last week's batch and almost blew the whole schedule. We can't afford mistakes, not with what we've got coming through Dock 7. Ryan froze. He wasn't sure what was in those shipments, but from the tone of their voices, it wasn't something the company wanted on record. As they turned to leave, David paused, glanced around, and spotted Ryan. His eyes narrowed. "New guy," he said slowly, walking over. "What are you doing back here?" Ryan smiled faintly, raising his water bottle. "Just grabbing a refill. Didn't want to wait in line." David's posture relaxed a little, but the warning remained in his voice. "Here's some advice, Turner. Focus on your own work. Don't listen to things that don't involve you. Questions make people uncomfortable around here. And when people are uncomfortable, things tend to go badly." He clapped Ryan on the shoulder with just enough force to send a message. "Now get back to it." As they left, Ryan stood there for a moment, water forgotten, heart pounding. That hadn't been a casual warning. It had been a threat wrapped in a smile. He returned to the floor, going through the motions of stacking and moving inventory, but his mind was spiraling. This wasn't just a dysfunctional workplace. This wasn't about supervisors being lazy or abrasive. What he'd overheard hinted at something far deeper, something criminal. Ryan had anticipated finding broken policies, maybe even stolen overtime hours, but this was different. This was orchestrated. Off-the-books shipments meant someone was moving product without accountability. Inventory logs were being falsified, and the people responsible weren't afraid. They were confident. That confidence meant protection, and protection meant leadership was involved. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was corruption, and it was organized. That night, back in his rented apartment, Ryan sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the scribbled notes in his pocket notebook. Names, times, quotes. He tried piecing together a timeline, but nothing quite fit yet. Then his phone buzzed. No name, no number, just a message. "Hope you enjoyed your first week, Josh. Keep your head down. Some questions are dangerous to ask." The air left his lungs. His hands trembled slightly as he read the message again. It wasn't just intimidation. It was confirmation. Someone knew who he was, or at least someone was watching him closely enough to mark him as a threat. He looked around the apartment, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The old blinds, the crack under the front door. Even the rental phone, meant to be secure, suddenly felt compromised. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. You are being watched. Sleep didn't come that night. Ryan lay awake in the dark, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He played the message over and over again in his head, replayed David's eyes locking with his in the break room, the way Marcus had laughed on the first day, the broken safety banners, the missing paperwork. The cracks weren't random. They were intentional. They had built a system to mask the truth. And now that he'd seen the edge of it, they wanted him silent. But they had made a mistake. Ryan Mitchell wasn't just another worker looking for a paycheck. He was the man who built this company. And now he was the one ready to burn the lies down. If they wanted to intimidate him, they should have done more than send a text. They should have buried the truth better. Because tomorrow he was digging deeper. By the time Friday rolled around, Ryan Mitchell's body was running on fumes. Every joint ached. His forearms throbbed. His neck was stiff from hours spent bent over heavy boxes under flickering lights and stale air. But fatigue was no longer the hardest part of the job. What wore him down now was the slow realization that the corruption he'd uncovered wasn't an isolated cancer. It was woven into the bones of the warehouse, from the floors to the ceilings. And that day, standing by the receiving dock beneath the drone of conveyor belts, Ryan witnessed something that would fracture whatever remained of his emotional distance from the mission. Her name was Emily Johnson. She was 7 months pregnant and still working triple shifts, and she collapsed, hard, right in front of him. The moment her knees buckled, Ryan dropped his scanner and rushed forward, catching her elbow as she struggled to breathe. Her face was pale, her shirt clinging to her with sweat. "I'm fine," she whispered, gasping, trying to wave him off. "I just need a second." But she wasn't fine. Her breathing was shallow. Her legs trembled. She was clearly on the verge of passing out. A few other workers gathered around, concerned but hesitant, unsure of what would happen if they stopped working. Within seconds, Supervisor Marcus Hayes stormed in, eyes locked on the commotion. "What's this?" he snapped. "Break time for everyone." Ryan stood between Marcus and Emily, holding her gently as she leaned against a pallet. "She needs medical attention," he said, trying to keep his voice measured. Marcus scoffed. "If she can't handle the work, she shouldn't be here. We don't pay people to rest." The words hit Ryan like a slap. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Emily tried to stand upright again, wiping her forehead. "Please, it's okay," she murmured. "I need this job. Just give me a few minutes." Marcus turned on his heel. "Make it quick. Next time, you're off the schedule." As he disappeared back into the chaos of the warehouse floor, Ryan helped Emily to a bench in the corner of the break room. She shook as she sat down, hands resting over her belly. "I can't afford to lose this," she said, eyes wet but not crying. She'd already run out of tears, it seemed. "The baby's due in 8 weeks. I've been working extra shifts because my insurance doesn't cover what it used to." That caught Ryan off guard. The company provided comprehensive plans. He had signed off on the benefit allocations himself. But when he asked more, Emily just shrugged. "They said premiums went up. I barely get anything covered now. We were told it's a budget thing." Later that afternoon, Ryan found himself in the upstairs office hallway, slipping into a space just outside the supervisor lounge. He didn't have to wait long. Inside, Marcus and another team lead were talking, loud, careless, and comfortable in their secrecy. "You see that boat I just bought?" Marcus laughed. 10 grand down, all thanks to our wellness fund." The other man snorted. "Those fools don't know what's going on. They think we're trimming costs for the quarterly reports. I've got a vacation planned off their health premiums." Ryan's chest went tight. The benefits budget was being siphoned. Funds meant for sick leave, maternity coverage, and preventive care were being stolen and redirected by supervisors. And no one was stopping it because the people suffering didn't have the power to speak up, or the strength, or the time. As Ryan sat in his car that night, notebook in hand, the full horror began to set in. This wasn't just greed, it was exploitation, systematized and dressed up in corporate jargon. His own cost-cutting initiative from 2 years ago, intended to optimize employee coverage and reduce administrative bloat, had created the loophole Marcus and his crew were now exploiting. Ryan remembered the board meeting clearly. Slick presentations, buzzwords about digital integration, and premium tiering. The consultants had praised it. The numbers looked great. But no one had tested how those changes trickled down to a woman like Emily, someone who worked through pregnancy, skipped breaks, and was rewarded with a threat to her employment when her body gave out. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress of his rented apartment, his mind replaying the moments from the day like a looped broadcast. He saw Emily's legs shaking. He heard Marcus bragging about his boat. He pictured the slide deck from that fateful board meeting and realized, with a deep pit in his stomach, that he'd been complicit. Not out of malice, but ignorance. Willful distance. He had let the numbers seduce him. But now he saw what those numbers had hidden: broken people, broken systems, and a culture where silence was survival. He had come to the warehouse to uncover mismanagement. What he found was so much worse: a machine that fed on its workers to keep running. And it was time to pull the plug before more lives were crushed beneath it. The assignment came early Monday morning, delivered without eye contact and with less explanation than a weather report. "Turner," barked a clipboard-wielding assistant supervisor, "you're on high value today. Tom wants you in Bay 3. Go now." Ryan didn't respond, just nodded, kept his posture low, and followed the signs toward the cordoned-off section of the warehouse marked with laminated labels. Secure zone. Authorized staff only. He'd only heard whispers about this area during his first week, mainly from workers who referred to it with a strange mixture of respect and dread. It was where the company's most expensive goods were stored: designer handbags, watches, jewelry, electronics, all sold under the Mitchell & Comber luxury brand. Ryan had approved the security budgets for this zone himself. Cameras, logbooks, electronic tracking. This space was supposed to be airtight. What he found instead was chaos dressed as control. As he stepped past the first checkpoint, Ryan noted the silence. The usual clatter of forklifts and shouting was replaced by a manufactured stillness, like the quiet before a storm. Tom Wheeler, the supervisor in charge of the high-value unit, was already waiting. Mid-40s, lean, sharp-featured, with eyes that scanned people the way a butcher might inspect meat. "So you're the new guy," he said, not offering a handshake. "Listen close. This zone runs smooth because I run it tight. No questions, no mistakes. You touch what you're told to touch. You scan what I say. Got it?" Ryan nodded once. He'd seen this type before. Men who mistake fear for respect. Men who hide cruelty behind the word efficiency. Ryan was assigned to log a shipment of limited edition Caldwell watches, each unit worth nearly $2,000. He approached the pallet and began scanning barcodes and verifying inventory against the manifest. But as he worked, something began to gnaw at him. The shipping list recorded 50 watches in the load. He double-counted, then triple-counted. There were only 42. At first, he questioned himself. Maybe the rest were arriving in a second shipment. Maybe the boxes had been mislabeled. But a glance at the logistics screen showed no additional loads. This was it. He approached Wheeler, clipboard in hand, trying to appear as unsure as possible. "Hey, sorry to bug you," he said. "The manifest says 50 units. I only counted 42. Should I flag it?" Wheeler's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His face stiffened. "You accusing me of something, Turner?" he snapped. The room fell even quieter. Another worker looked up, then looked away. "Because last I checked, new guys don't get to audit my inventory." Ryan tried to clarify. "No, it's just—" But Wheeler stepped closer, lowering his voice into a venomous whisper. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Around here, we don't flag mistakes. We bury them. You want to keep your job, you learn to keep your head down and your mouth shut." He shoved the clipboard back into Ryan's chest and turned away. But the damage was done. Every pair of eyes in the room had seen it. No one would question anything now, not when silence was the only path to survival. Ryan stood there, frozen in place, his fingers curled tightly around the clipboard. His breath was shallow, his pulse hammering behind his temples. He had expected intimidation. He had prepared for verbal abuse. But this was organized theft, enforced through psychological warfare. The missing watches weren't a fluke. They were part of a system. Someone was skimming high-value products off the top and adjusting the paperwork to hide it. And the message was clear. The moment you noticed, you became a threat. He resumed his task, scanning the remaining boxes, his expression blank. But beneath that stillness, his thoughts burned. Wheeler wasn't just bullying people. He was running a side operation, and Ryan had just caught the first glimpse of the machinery behind it. That night, back in his apartment, Ryan documented everything. He noted the unit count, the time, the discrepancy, and Wheeler's exact words. He sketched a rough map of the high-value zone, marked with where the cameras should have been and which areas Wheeler had steered him away from. Then he did something he hadn't done since arriving. He called up the digital back-end of the inventory system using his hidden administrator credentials. As expected, the entry for that shipment had already been updated. 50 units received, all accounted for. No exceptions, no flags. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the falsified data on the screen. It wasn't just one bad actor. Someone with system-level access had already covered Wheeler's tracks. The theft ran deeper than he thought, and if he kept asking questions, he wouldn't just lose his cover. He might lose control of the entire operation before he even knew who was really pulling the strings. By the end of his third week undercover, Ryan Mitchell had seen enough to know something was deeply broken within the walls of his Houston warehouse. But even with everything he had already uncovered, embezzled benefits, missing luxury stock, supervisors who ruled through fear, it wasn't until that Wednesday morning that he realized just how much danger his workers were truly in. It began with a routine safety check that never should have been necessary. Ryan had volunteered, under the guise of Josh Turner, to help move overflow pallets near the back of the facility. As he maneuvered past a cluttered aisle of shrink-wrapped merchandise, he stopped dead in his tracks. The red metal door marked "Emergency Exit, Keep Clear" was entirely blocked by 3 stacked crates of bottled cleaning fluid. Boxes towered nearly 6 feet high. If there had been a fire or any kind of emergency, no one would be getting out that door alive. Ryan scanned the area. No one seemed concerned. Workers shuffled past the blocked exit as if it were just another fixture of the warehouse. No one mentioned it. No one seemed surprised. His instincts kicked in, and he started checking other exits. One was chained shut. Another had a broken panic bar and was being used to store mop buckets. It wasn't just carelessness, it was policy. Somewhere along the line, someone had decided that saving space or cutting costs was more important than preserving lives. That revelation deepened when Ryan returned to his loading station and realized how thick the air felt. His throat was dry, his skin was clammy, and the fans above him barely moved. He looked up. Half of the ventilation ducts were idle. The warehouse's cooling system, which he remembered approving years ago as state-of-the-art, was functioning at maybe half capacity. That afternoon, he finally met someone who would confirm his worst fears. Miguel Santos was a forklift operator in his early 50s, with streaks of gray in his beard and a noticeable limp. He'd been working at the warehouse for 8 years, long enough to remember when it used to function like a real company. The two of them found themselves alone in the break room during an unscheduled lull. Miguel cracked open an energy drink, his third of the day, his hands trembling slightly as he took a sip. "Used to be better," he muttered. Ryan tilted his head. "The job?" Miguel nodded. "Yeah, back when Mitchell was still running the place." Ryan froze, realizing Miguel was talking about him. "We had clean air, working fans, actual safety drills. Managers weren't angels, but at least they gave a damn. Then about 3 years ago, everything shifted. New systems, new bosses. Everything became numbers, margins, efficiency." Miguel looked over, his eyes tired. "Now, we're just machines they run until something breaks. I've seen 3 guys pass out this year alone. One of them had asthma. The break room doesn't even have a first aid kit anymore. Said it wasn't cost-effective." Ryan felt something crack inside. These weren't abstract problems anymore. They weren't lines on a report or percentages in a budget. They were people, his people, enduring suffering in the very system he had once believed was efficient and modern. The truth landed like a punch. He had created the structure, the policies, the incentives. He had trusted his executives to implement them with compassion and balance, but they hadn't. They'd weaponized his vision. They'd used his desire for innovation as an excuse for exploitation. As Miguel spoke, Ryan's thoughts spiraled backward. He remembered the glossy PowerPoint presentations in boardrooms, the smiling consultants who promised streamlined operations and resource optimization. He remembered signing off on cost-saving adjustments that consolidated HVAC controls, revised floor space use, and eliminated redundant safety protocols. On paper, the metrics had looked brilliant. Profits had gone up. Shareholders had applauded. But what those numbers had hidden was Miguel's shaking hands, Emily's gasping breath, and hundreds of blocked emergency exits that might one day be the difference between life and death. Ryan stared at the warped linoleum of the break-room floor, the smell of mold faint but unmistakable. He felt the weight of his own blindness press heavily on his chest. That night, in his apartment, Ryan sat in complete silence. His laptop glowed dimly, the screen filled with floor plans, ventilation records, and internal memos, most of them signed by people he had once trusted. Some were signed by him. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply sat with the knowledge that his hands had helped build the system now hurting people he had sworn to protect. It wasn't enough to blame middle management or rogue supervisors anymore. He had to own the fact that efficiency, when unchecked, becomes cruelty. That profit, when prioritized over people, rots the foundation of any business. As he closed his laptop, Ryan made a vow. The next board meeting wouldn't be about strategy or forecasts. It would be about reckoning, and it would start with the truth. The moment came late on a Friday afternoon, after a brutally hot shift in the loading bay. The kind of afternoon where even the fans groaned in protest and the heat clung to every corner of the warehouse like wet wool. Ryan Mitchell, still wearing the mask of Josh Turner, was wrapping up inventory when he heard quiet sobs echoing from the corridor near the storage cages. At first, he thought it was machinery squealing. But when he rounded the corner, he found Lisa McCarthy, one of the youngest workers on the team, crouched beside a stack of broken pallets, her face hidden behind trembling hands. She looked barely 20. Her red curls were tied up in a frizzy bun, her work gloves dropped beside her, and her knees pressed against her chest like she was trying to disappear. "Lisa," Ryan said gently, kneeling down. "Are you okay?" She shook her head without looking at him. "No," she whispered. "Not really." Her voice cracked like it hadn't been used in hours. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I hurt my back unloading a shipment last week. My doctor gave me a note, said I needed rest, but when I gave it to HR, they said I wasn't eligible, said my hours didn't qualify for paid leave." She looked up at him now, her eyes red and swollen. "I've worked 6 days a week for the past 3 months. I've worked overtime, weekends. I even skipped Christmas with my mom." Her voice trembled with something deeper than pain. It was betrayal. "They said if I missed another shift, I'd be let go. But I can barely stand up straight." Ryan felt his throat tighten. Her pain wasn't just physical. It was the breaking point of everything he'd been witnessing. This was what institutional cruelty looked like, dressed up in policy, disguised as protocol. Ryan helped her to her feet and sat her down in the least dusty corner of the break room. He brought her water, kept his questions brief. He knew how quickly sympathy in this place could look suspicious. As she calmed, he asked quietly, "Did they give you any paperwork?" Lisa laughed bitterly. "They said it must have been misfiled. Told me I should follow up next week." Ryan clenched his jaw. It was the same excuse Emily had heard, the same language used to deny Miguel's safety requests. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. This wasn't just bad management. It was coordination, a deliberate effort to bury workers' rights under red tape and silence. That night, as he returned to his apartment and collapsed onto the sagging couch, his phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "You're asking too many questions, Turner. Walk away while you still can." This time, Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't stare at the screen in fear or delete the message like before. He saved it, documented it, every letter, every timestamp. Then he opened his laptop and began assembling a timeline, a spiderweb of quotes, memos, missing reports, and unfiled medical claims. He added Lisa's story, Emily's collapse, Miguel's hands, the stolen watches, the blocked exits, the falsified manifests. With every entry, the outline grew clearer. This wasn't a disorganized mess of incompetence. It was structured, protected. There was a playbook, and someone powerful had written it. The more Ryan mapped it out, the more he saw patterns emerge. Specific shifts, recycled excuses, identical responses to very different problems. The abuse wasn't accidental. It was designed. His heart raced with something that hadn't stirred in weeks. Clarity. The weight of helplessness was beginning to shift into purpose. Ryan had come here thinking he would witness some violations and quietly reform the system from the top. But what he had walked into was more dangerous, an entrenched network of fraud and intimidation embedded inside his own company. And now, the question wasn't whether to act. It was how far he would need to go. As he looked at the evidence filling his screen, he realized something else. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He would need allies. But more importantly, he would need to expose the rot without alerting those pulling the strings. The trap would need to be meticulous, calculated, and undeniable. That night, sleep came late and fitfully. But when it did, it came not with dread, but with focus. He dreamt of hallways lined with locked doors and of finding the right key. When he woke, he wasn't Ryan the CEO or Josh the warehouse grunt. He was something in between, someone who had seen both sides and knew exactly what was at stake. As the sun rose over Houston and the warehouse prepared to open for another day of business as usual, Ryan stood before the mirror, adjusted his worn cap, and whispered to himself, "Let them watch. I'm not hiding anymore." And with that, he stepped into the fire, not to survive it, but to burn it down and rebuild something better from the ashes. The warehouse felt different at night. Not quieter. No, there was still the dull hum of machinery, the soft clatter of forklifts, and the occasional thud of shifting crates, but the silence had changed in tone. It wasn't the stillness of sleep, but the kind that follows secrets being whispered behind closed doors. It was nearly midnight when Ryan Mitchell, still in the skin of Josh Turner, received a message on the burner phone buried deep in his locker. No name, just a sentence. Dock 7. Come alone. Don't be late. His instincts screamed caution, but his mission demanded curiosity. Pulling his cap low and adjusting his gloves, he slipped out of the employee locker room and headed into the maze of steel and shadows that made up the rear of the warehouse. Dock 7 was the least used loading bay, positioned behind a wall of older shelving units and often passed over for more accessible docks. But tonight it was lit dimly by a single row of overhead bulbs. As Ryan approached, he saw two figures standing near a shipping container that had already been cracked open. One of them turned, and he immediately recognized the voice. "Turner," David Brooks said with a smirk. Just in time. David wore the same red vest as always, but his posture was different, looser, smug. He waved Ryan over with a familiarity that felt rehearsed. "Wheeler vouched for you, said you know how to keep your mouth shut." Ryan said nothing, letting the mask of Josh do the talking. "You want to move up in this place," David continued. "Then it's time you saw how the real business works." David led him past the open container and into a makeshift corridor formed by stacked crates and reconfigured shelving. They passed through a narrow steel door that opened into a space Ryan hadn't even known existed. A partitioned room hidden behind the standard storage area, windowless, thick with the scent of oil, cardboard, and something faintly metallic. Inside were two tables, both lined with rows of luxury products, watches, handbags, jewelry, all branded under Mitchell & Co. On one side were genuine items, still in their pristine packaging. On the other, near-identical counterfeits, manufactured with an alarming level of detail. "Welcome to our quality control lab," David said, lifting a watch in each hand. "The real deal and the fake. Bet you can't tell the difference." He was right. Ryan had to squint to notice that the stitching on the counterfeit was slightly less precise, barely perceptible, easily missed. Ryan tried to keep his breathing steady as David continued the tour. "We've got artists in China, Vietnam, Turkey, you name it. They reverse engineer every product we make, and then we do the switch right here, under your boss's nose." He chuckled at his own line. "You want to know the best part? The shipping tags, the barcodes, all real. Because we're using the company's actual logistics system. Everything passes through customs without a glance." Ryan's stomach turned. The realization hit like a steel beam. The corruption wasn't just financial, it was global. This wasn't petty theft. It was a black market smuggling operation, leveraging the trusted name and infrastructure of Mitchell and Coburn to launder counterfeits into legitimate retail channels across the world, and it was being run from the belly of the empire Ryan had built with his own hands. The operation moved like a machine. Workers, some he recognized, others who clearly worked only nights, methodically replaced authentic items with counterfeits, resealed boxes, and prepped them for shipment. David oversaw it all with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable. "We've been doubling volume since the new systems came online," he said proudly. "The CEO thinks it's due to efficiency upgrades. What a joke." Ryan forced a tight smile, nodding along, but every word from David made his skin crawl. This was what his name had become, a stamp of credibility for thieves, a trusted brand that masked an international criminal enterprise. The irony stung like acid. As the night wore on, Ryan memorized every movement, every face, every code scribbled on the manifest sheets. He spotted a small camera mounted discreetly on a shelf, his own hidden device, planted earlier that week in preparation for a moment just like this. It was recording everything. If he could retrieve the footage, he'd have undeniable proof of the operation. But there was no room for error. The wrong move, the wrong glance, and this room would turn from a counterfeit factory into a trap. Just as David turned his back to inspect a mislabeled shipment, Ryan caught sight of something even more disturbing. A printed spreadsheet marked Global Orders, Echo Phase. He didn't have time to read it fully, but two things stood out: a list of names and shipping routes tied to European and Asian markets. When David finally escorted him back toward the loading dock, Ryan knew the rules had changed. He wasn't just an undercover CEO anymore. He was a witness to a sprawling international crime syndicate, one operating through his own company's veins. As they parted ways, David clapped him on the back. "Glad you're part of the family now, Turner. Just remember, loyalty is everything." Ryan walked away without a word, heart pounding in his ears. He didn't need confirmation. He had seen it, touched it, recorded it. But more than that, he now understood the scale. This was bigger than rogue managers and stolen inventory. This was about power, control, and betrayal that reached the highest levels of the company he once thought he knew. And come morning, Ryan Mitchell would no longer be content to observe. It was time to fight back. The next night came with a strange stillness, the kind that sinks into the bones like a warning. Ryan Mitchell hadn't slept much. His mind was still looping images from the counterfeit operation, David Brooks holding up fake watches like trophies, the smug smirk on his face, and the spreadsheet labeled Global Orders, Echo Phase. That one detail gnawed at Ryan, pulling at a thread he knew he had to follow. And so, after another full day on the warehouse floor, he stayed behind under the cover of overtime, silent, unnoticed, invisible. Just after 11 p.m., a sleek black SUV pulled into the far lot and parked near Dock 9. Ryan, hiding behind a column of shrink-wrapped pallets, watched as two men stepped out. One of them he recognized immediately. His heart nearly stopped. Noah Chen, the company's head of international logistics. a polished executive with a flawless record and deep ties across Asia and Europe. Chen wasn't just high-ranking, he reported directly to Ryan. Chen walked with authority, a leather briefcase in one hand, a smartphone in the other. Following close behind him was none other than Robert Kane, the warehouse manager Ryan had once trusted more than any other. Robert, the man who gave a toast at Ryan's Entrepreneur of the Year gala. Robert, who'd once said, "We built this company together." Now, here he was, casually unlocking a side door and leading Chen into the hidden counterfeit room like it belonged to him. Ryan stayed low, creeping along the edges of the loading bay, heart hammering in his chest. He reached a stack of crates just outside the room and positioned his body against the wall, close enough to hear and to record. What he heard turned his stomach. "Everything's running on schedule," Chen said, his voice cool and clipped. "We've secured the overseas distribution. By the time anyone sees the shift in revenue, the damage will be done." Robert nodded. "And the board?" Chen glanced at his phone. "They'll be presented with falsified performance reports at the next meeting. Mitchell's absence makes it easy. Rumors of burnout, mental decline. Planted quietly, of course. When the numbers start to dip, they'll look for new leadership." Ryan's vision blurred. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a coup. Chen and Kane weren't just stealing from the company. They were orchestrating his removal, slowly undermining his reputation while using his name to expand an international crime ring. "Project Nova," Chen added, "is our insurance policy. If anything goes wrong, we move the assets under a dummy corporation and let the board believe Mitchell mismanaged it all." Ryan's hands shook as he pulled out the small recording device from his pocket. He'd used it earlier in the week to document minor infractions. Tonight, it would capture the collapse of trust. Every word, every syllable. He needed it all. He slid the device through a gap in the crate, angling it toward the makeshift war room. As Chen and Kane pored over shipping routes and financial forecasts, Ryan's ears caught fragments of horror. Redirecting real inventory to international buyers. Undetectable laundering through subsidiary vendors. Enough capital to force a hostile reinvestment. It wasn't just about counterfeits anymore. They were using Ryan's brand, his infrastructure, and his silence to build a criminal enterprise that would eventually devour him whole. A few minutes later, Chen paused and turned toward Kane. "There's still one variable we need to control. Turner." Robert raised an eyebrow. "The temp?" Chen nodded slowly. "He's been asking too many questions. Quiet, but curious. You said he's been in the high-value zone." Kane hesitated. "Yeah. Wheeler said he's sharp, but loyal. At least so far." Chen's voice dropped. "Let's not take chances. Find out who he is. If he's clean, give him a bonus to stay quiet. If he's not, deal with it." Ryan's blood went cold. He had been discovered, or at least suspected. He eased back from the crates as quietly as possible, every movement calculated, every breath held. He couldn't leave yet, not without the recording. Finally, after what felt like hours, the two men exited, disappearing back into the shadows with their briefcase of betrayal. Ryan retrieved the device and tucked it into his jacket. It was warm from the heat of the machines, but the data inside it was pure fire. He didn't go home that night. He drove to a nearby hotel under a false name where he stayed up until dawn copying the recording onto multiple encrypted drives. By sunrise, he had backups in 3 separate locations. The betrayal was deeper than anything he had imagined. The people he had mentored were plotting to ruin him, using his systems to empower criminals and erase his legacy. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought Ryan Mitchell had left the fight. They didn't realize he had just begun to sharpen his blade. The warehouse floor buzzed with routine on the surface, but beneath that familiar rhythm, a storm was gathering. Ryan Mitchell had spent 3 weeks buried in dust, sweat, and deception. But now, armed with recordings, names, and patterns, he was ready to strike. He knew this had to be precise. A single misstep could cause the conspirators to scatter or worse, destroy the evidence, and disappear into the corporate shadows. He needed eyes in every corner, ears in every hallway, and the trust of one person who had every reason not to give it. That person was Emily Johnson. The same Emily who had collapsed on the floor 2 weeks ago from exhaustion and had been told to tough it out or leave. When Ryan approached her after hours in the dim break room, her reaction was quiet disbelief. "You're the CEO?" she whispered, glancing toward the security camera. "Why are you here?" Ryan lowered his voice. "Because they betrayed both of us. And now, I need your help." Emily listened as he outlined the plan. Every name, every shipment, every coded message. Her face shifted from confusion to anger, then finally to resolve. She'd seen enough to know he wasn't exaggerating. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Ryan smiled, not the corporate smile of press releases and stockholder meetings, but the smile of a man who'd just found his first real ally in a war no one else knew was happening. That weekend, using the same logistics system the conspirators had hijacked, Ryan arranged a special shipment of high-value promotional items destined for an overseas partner. The products were marked, boxed, sealed, but with one major difference. The crates had been prepped by federal agents posing as a corporate audit team. Hidden cameras were installed inside the boxes, the warehouse, even the clipboard scanners. Every movement, every word, every digital override would be recorded. Monday night arrived humid and thick with tension. David Brooks, as expected, showed up early to inspect the shipment. Tom Wheeler followed not long after, bringing with him forged manifests and access logs. They didn't question the order. It looked like a gift from heaven. Luxury items ready for switching, and the perfect cover story. Just after 10 p.m., Robert Kane arrived to supervise the final transition. Ryan, still disguised as Josh Turner, was already inside the processing room, watching from the shadows. Then the final piece arrived. Noah Chen, sharp as ever in his tailored suit, nodding in approval as counterfeit goods were unpacked, ready to replace the real ones. "Project Nova's last trial run," he murmured to Robert. "After this, we start scaling globally." That was Ryan's cue. He stepped forward under the harsh industrial lights and slowly removed his cap. "You're not scaling anything," he said. The room fell silent. Every supervisor turned, Chen's brow furrowed. "Who?" he began, but stopped cold when Ryan pulled off his glasses. "Ryan Mitchell," he said calmly, "founder, CEO, and tonight, your worst mistake." For a beat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. David lunged for the exit, only to be tackled by two auditors who quickly identified themselves as federal agents. Wheeler tried to smash a scanner, but Emily, now standing at the doorway, locked it down remotely. Robert backed away, shaking his head. "Ryan, wait. This isn't what it looks like." But Ryan didn't flinch. "It's exactly what it looks like. You sold out the company we built. You lied. You stole. And you endangered every honest worker here." As more agents poured in through the loading docks, flashlights sweeping through crates and offices, the full scope of the sting became clear. Every crate had been tracked, every keystroke logged, every spoken word caught on hidden microphones. Chen attempted to maintain composure. "You'll never get the board to believe you," he hissed as the cuffs clicked shut. "You can't prove intent." Ryan simply handed the lead agent a flash drive. "Surveillance footage, voice recordings, altered manifests, and the transfer logs of your fake corporation in Singapore," he said. Intent covered. As the conspirators were led out, silent now, shackled and stunned, Emily approached Ryan. "You really did it," she said quietly. "You took it all back." He looked around at the stunned warehouse team gathered nearby, watching their managers hauled away. "No," he said, "we did it." Dawn rose over Houston as federal vans pulled away from the warehouse, leaving behind a building stripped of corruption but heavy with silence. Ryan stood on the loading dock, the morning light catching the dust on his boots and the wrinkles in his borrowed uniform. For a long moment, he said nothing, just watched as the first shift began to arrive, eyes wide with questions, whispers already spreading. He knew there would be fallout. There would be press conferences, boardroom battles, maybe even lawsuits. But he also knew that for the first time in years, the warehouse was free. Not perfect, not yet safe, but no longer poisoned from within. And standing beside Emily, Miguel, and a handful of workers who had carried this company on their backs, Ryan made himself a quiet promise. The rebuilding starts today, and it starts with truth. The warehouse was quieter than usual on the Monday morning following the sting, though the stillness wasn't born of fear this time. It was reflection. The previous week had seen arrests, news vans, and boardroom shocks that sent ripples across the entire company. And yet, here in Houston, as the sun filtered in through the high windows and glinted off steel shelving, the silence was different. Workers moved slowly, glancing at one another with a mixture of hesitation and hope. Ryan Mitchell stood at the front of the break room, the same room where weeks ago he had sat, invisible and exhausted, pretending to be someone else. Now he stood as himself, not in a suit, but in the same warehouse uniform as everyone else. The employees gathered around, many still unsure what to expect from the man who had been CEO and undercover stranger at the same time. Ryan's voice was steady, but not rehearsed. He didn't come with a corporate statement or polished speech. "I came here to understand what had gone wrong," he began. "What I found broke my heart. Systems I approved were used to harm you. People I trusted chose profit over humanity, and I wasn't here to see it happen. For that, I am deeply sorry." He paused, letting the words settle. "But this warehouse is more than numbers. It's built on the hands and hearts of every person in this room. You kept this place alive when the system failed you. Now, I promise, we're going to rebuild it together." He announced full back pay for unpaid overtime, new benefits for those denied care, and a zero-tolerance policy for management abuse. "And we're not outsourcing change," he added. "It starts here, with you." To signal that shift, he named Emily Johnson as the new head of employee relations. The moment was met with surprised murmurs and growing applause. A few weeks earlier, she'd nearly fainted from overwork. Now she stood in front of her co-workers, stronger than ever. "No one knows the gaps in this system better than she does," Ryan said, "and no one's more qualified to close them." Lisa McCarthy, the young worker who had been denied medical leave and wept alone behind the storage racks, was appointed to lead the newly created Workplace Health and Safety Committee. Her first act, reinstating and upgrading emergency protocols, placing first aid stations in every zone, and organizing monthly safety drills. She beamed, and for the first time in a long while, her hands didn't tremble when she took the mic. Miguel Santos, the veteran with 8 years of service and tired eyes, was invited to train the new shift supervisors, teaching them not just how to move product, but how to move with compassion. "We don't need watchdogs," he said simply. "We need leaders who listen." The culture shift was slow, deliberate, and filled with tough conversations, but it was real. The blocked emergency exits were cleared. Ventilation systems were repaired. Payroll systems were overhauled for transparency, and Ryan didn't issue memos from a tower downtown. He showed up in boots and gloves, checking in with every department. "You can't lead what you don't touch," he told his executive team, many of whom were now required to work shadow days on the floor. 6 months later, the Houston warehouse was unrecognizable, not because the walls had changed, but because the people inside them had. Productivity rose, but more importantly, trust returned. New hires were trained with care. Complaints were met with solutions, not silence. The facility was spotlighted in national business journals as a model for ethical reform, and employee retention jumped to its highest level in a decade. Ryan refused to take credit. "They saved this place," he said, gesturing to his workers. "Not me. I just finally listened." One afternoon, Emily found Ryan in the packing line, sleeves rolled up, shoulders damp with sweat. "You still doing these shifts?" she asked with a smile. He nodded. "Not because I have to, because I need to remember what real work feels like." And so the man who once sat in glass boardrooms now walked the floor where boxes were taped, forklifts hummed, and stories were shared over lukewarm coffee. The company he rebuilt was no longer just Mitchell and Co. It was a community bound by shared pain, earned trust, and a renewed commitment to dignity. The past could not be erased, but the future was no longer being written by corruption. It was being built by hands that had once been overlooked, hands now shaping a legacy far more valuable than any quarterly profit, a legacy of redemption, reform, and rebirth. One step at a time, one worker at a time, Ryan Mitchell returned, not just as a CEO, but as a leader who finally understood that true power begins where trust is earned, on the floor. If you believe in stories that reveal the hidden truths behind power, corruption, and redemption, then this is just the beginning. At Deep Inside HQ, we uncover what lies beneath the surface, bringing you raw, emotional, and powerful narratives that challenge the system and elevate the human spirit. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who still believes that integrity can triumph over greed. Let's rebuild trust, one story at a time.